Blair Callaghan. Blair is a trail and ultra runner based in the Seattle, Washington area. Blair has also earned her doctorate of physical therapy degree from Columbia University and has since practiced in private outpatient clinics in Washington, D.C., San Diego, and now Seattle. So, welcome, Blair. Very excited to kind of get to our topic today, which is going to be a little intro to Trail 101, whatever we decide to call it at the end of this. But very excited to chat.
Yeah, thanks, John. I'm really excited to talk to everybody about trail running.
Well, I thought maybe a perfect way to kickstart it would just be, and I don't, I'm excited to hear. Just it's not some the typical thing people fall into trail running, right? It's like people come from a track program, they go into whatever. So I am curious to just kind of find out, how you ended up kind of as a trail runner, if you will.
hmm Um, well, yeah, overall, I was not a runner growing up. I played sports. I was a soccer player. I played lacrosse in college. I got into running actually 'cause I got mono in my freshman year of college, and mono wiped me out. So I had to get back in shape for the next year. And my sister had also gotten mono, and so we decided to sign up for a half marathon together and train for that so that we could get back in shape.
Mhm.
And that lit a fire, and I, haven't stopped running, sometimes more regularly, sometimes less regularly. Um, but from there, ran mostly road stuff through, I think probably about 2015. 2015. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, and so I went and actually crewed my sister who ran the Leadville 100 in 2017. So I guess that's when I got into it, and I saw this sport, and I was like, this looks cool. You are through the mountains. There are cool snacks at all the aid stations. Like, it seemed like more of an adventure than running on the roads, which is also fun. But I was like, I've got to try this. This community is so positive. Everybody is like rooting each other on. Uh, and so at that time, I lived in Washington, D.C., so like not a lot of trails.
Yeah.
Uh, so I ran a race in New Mexico where my sister was living. That was a trail race. Loved it, and then kept doing that. Moved to San Diego, had more trails there. That's when I really got into it. I was able to continue back in San Diego.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that that Leadville crewing was like what
Mhm.
kickstarted it. Because
I know.
as,
That's what.
as as Blair knows, I was coaching an athlete to a Leadville attempt last year, and Blair was the person I reached out to for a lot of advice on a lot of stuff. So, but yeah, you failed to mention at that point that was like your jump
That,
start for the sport. That's very awesome. So
yeah,
that is the Sufferfest, that race. What I've come to learn from a couple people out there. So you really like there was something that connected.
I don't know what that says about me, but I was like, oh, this race is what has gotten me into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, very fun.
Fair. So actually, a great segue here. So, tradi- your history of running is very similar to mine too. Where I was not a track runner. That was Matt. Matt was a track runner. Was a distance runner. Came into it as an adult. Um, Most people come in on road. You came in on road,
hmm
and then made that transition to trail. What would you say, in terms of, I won't specify too much, or just the big differences between road running and trail running?
I would say the major difference that everyone's going to notice first off, and I think that there have probably been some questions about that, it is until you're really familiar with a certain trail or trail system, you're not going to know what is appropriate for you on a certain section, whether or not it's a really steep climb, descent, or if the trail is really smooth, or if it's rocky and you have to go slower. Um, Kind of similar to running on in the snow or in the rain. It's a little different. And so you kind of have to go by effort, um, which then makes it so that you have to be very attuned to your effort level as opposed to just glued to your watch, which I think makes it fun. You can go by feel and enjoy the scenery as opposed to constantly feeling the stress of like, am I hitting specific paces? So I think that's the major difference. The other differences I think will probably is different safety concerns,
Mhm.
different, you don't have water fountains that you're running by all the time. Um, and things.
All right. If you'll allow me, because we've only gone 6 minutes now, but to immediately change the order that I provided you, just because I think sometimes if I see a real natural segue, I like to follow it. And you hit something that's been certainly my experience. And yes, there was certainly a question here, which is, and I'll just skip to the question, which is basically, how do you find easy pace on the trail? Longer question here is, when I go out on the trails, my easy pace is really difficult to hold. I've noticed that I'm always in the red and seem to feel somewhat uncomfortable during the run. Running on trails is never easy. Are there any tips for kind of making it feel easy? And you mentioned running by effort. And so, would love to hear you just kind of talk a little bit about
Yeah, of course. Honestly, I feel like trail running has made me a better road runner because I can consider my effort better. Also, like when you're on trails, you don't necessarily want to be staring at your watch all the time. You might
that.
fall. And so a lot of it is understanding your own heart rate, constantly thinking about like, does this feel hard, medium, easy? Do I feel like I could have a conversation with someone? Honestly, I feel like the trail running community is great in that I do a lot of my trail runs with other people. You're kind of being tested and maintain a conversation, or if you're winded. Um, Honestly, that means a lot at the beginning if you're really interested in switching to trails or getting some of that experience. Is like you're going to be doing a lot of what we call power hiking.
Yeah, power hiking.
But you can do a hike and a power hike at a pretty quick clip. And so when your running effort becomes large, that's when you hike and you change your pace. And once your heart rate recovers, you jog a little bit. So it's really detaching yourself from the actual speed that you're running and listening to your body and feeling how hard it's working. And that's going to make sure that you want to do it again. If you're trying to hit your 30 paces on a climb that's 2,000 feet, probably not going to have a good time.
Yeah, it's to Blair's point. I mean, you probably just throw pace out the window for the most part. You mentioned heart rate. Do you key into heart rate while you're running, or is that more of like a secondary metric for you?
um, it depends for me on what I'm trying to achieve that specific run. Um, Oftentimes I'm trying to keep a pace, which to me is fun because you just get to run. I rarely stare at my heart rate because I can tell pretty well if something's easy or not. But if I'm trying to hit something like a more moderate, and if I'm trying to do certain distance moderate, I might flip my heart rate screen on watch up to the forefront and keep an eye on that. Especially if coach wants you to be some sort of heart rate training. Uh, if you're trying to stay below 150, that's probably going to mean a lot of hiking and walking and maybe standing.
Yeah,
So pay attention to it when it feels like you need to, but as a beginner, just be easy.
great. I think maybe kind of what goes with that a little bit. You mentioned power hiking, which was a term that I learned last year when working with a lot of ultra runners. Not walking, we're power hiking.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's a huge part of the sport, right? Like, you mentioned Leadville. Half that race is probably at a power hike in
Mhm.
comparison to some other races where a little bit different.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like we probably spend 2 hours talking about this next little topic, so we'll try to keep it tight here. But you kind of alluded to something that I would love to like nail down on it, which is, when do you make that determination for yourself? If you're trying to maintain a certain effort level, of when do you use the run, when do you use the hike, when do you transition back, etc.
Mhm. So I have been trail running for a while, so I feel like I'm doing a lot of this subconsciously. Is
Hmm.
that when I feel like my run pace that I'm able to sustain at a certain time is going to be less efficient than power hiking, I'll switch to a hike. And sometimes I switch to a hike and I'm like, I think I can go faster than this still. And then I'll switch back to a jog. Um, but that also includes a casual hike or an easier hike up a steep face, or someone really trying to hoof it up and hands on your knees, getting yourself up there. So there are a lot of different speeds, and it really just takes practice. It's like, I imagine it's very similar to when you start a run, when you're walking and you're keying that treadmill pace up and you hit the point where you're like, okay, now I'm running. That's going to be a little different for most people. And so that's going to be the same thing on a climb. I also try to take into consideration fueling. So for a lot of trail runs, like you need to be eating while you are hiking. I rely on a lot of gels. And most of us would probably say it's easier to take a gel when you're walking as opposed to running and bouncing and trying to tear the thing off. Um, so sometimes I will also use the opportunity of a steeper or longer climb to get my heart rate down a little bit, take a gel, sip on my water, see how I feel, and see if I want to keep running. And so that's a big component as well. Yeah. So again, I feel like I could talk about this forever, but
Yeah. Which
that's enough.
Yeah, and you hit on just a little like gem there at the end, which is when you're talking about your fueling, letting your heart rate drop. This will teeter a little bit more into the ultra world, which we'll like save for another segue. But much easier to digest when heart rate is lower versus running at a high level. So you think you want to take advantage of those lower heart rate moments to try to eat food and digest much easier than kind of when you're like running in a red line kind of situation. So that's a little gem that Blair dropped in there at the end. So I am curious because in addition to just being an outstanding athlete, also a physical therapist. And so there, I think, are some pretty different like physical characteristics that I would attribute to trail running versus road running. And so, kind of from a PT perspective, what are the kind of, if you were giving advice as a PT, what would be the physical differences in training or like the supplemental stuff you would say, this is a difference that I want you to address as a road runner going to trail or a trail runner trying to become a better trail runner?
So similarly to road running, I suggest a lot of strength training. I find that a lot of newer or honestly experienced trail runners are like, I'm running up hills all the time. I need to strength train. Like the hills are my strength training. And then you discover that if you are doing squats, you're doing deadlifts, you're doing step ups. I love a good high weight step. Then you become better at running up hills. And while I do agree that by nature of trail running, if you're going up and down elevation, you are strengthening a little bit more than your average road runner. But it's because your body needing to be stronger for these events. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you could be like, ugh, I'm strengthening, I'm running up hills. So similar prep as road running, just potentially different weights, potentially different endurance amount. Like I am okay with my trail runners who live in steeper terrains going a little heavier on lifting kind of throughout their season than some of my road runners that want to be fast. I definitely want to avoid them feeling very like sore and stiff in quads and hips when they're trying to rip workouts, which is, trail runners are ripping workouts too, but I want them to keep their weights and intensity high so they can sprint up hills.
Right. Fair. Any kind of thought to like feet and ankles in terms of like specific prep there? Just obviously the surface can be so variable in trail. I mean, you can go anywhere from like a nice soft gravel path to the gnarliest, rockiest, craggiest terrain. So a lot of disparity there. But any like kind of foot and ankle work you recommend?
Absolutely. Again, I feel like I've used this on all of my road running athletes as well as
Okay.
have really strong ankles, balance, proprioception. For anyone listening that has run on a trail or just honestly gravel, you recognize that your footing is less secure. You might find yourself looking down at your feet, which is good. I want people to look at their feet, but on a complicated trail, if you're just staring at your feet, you might run into something. Rock, tree, biker, bear, whatever. Uh, and so you have to be able to have good balance, good single leg control while your head is turning while your eyes are up. So that's a really good exercise to practice is just single leg standing with head tilts, single leg standing on like a foam pad or a rocker board, moving your head up and down side to side. Not the same as trail running, but it starts to give you similar stimuli. Um, and you can even go as basic as double leg heel raises, single heel raises, ankle band for days that you're not feeling balance heavy.
Yeah. That is a lot of awesome stuff there. That is, uh, yeah, to your point is because road runners use all those things, just like so pronounced on the trail. Everything is exacerbated a little bit. So really awesome recommendations there. So we'll kind of jump over as we touched on this next question that I was going to ask, which was the metrics you use kind of to dictate it. But we'll kind of replace it actually, which is so you classified yourself more as a trail runner. What kind of blend now do you do between road and trail? Because I gotta imagine it's not like 100% trail and then 100% road. Like, are you incorporating both as part of your own training routine?
Yeah, so I've talked about this a lot. I don't love treadmill running. So my running programming for myself involves a lot of what I can fit in during generally daylight hours, living in the middle of Seattle. And so it's harder for me to get to trails during the work week before it gets dark. Like I don't really have an interest in running in the woods mid dark unless I have a pacer with me, organized race. Um, so during the winter, I end up doing a lot of roads, and then I will get out to trails. We have really good trail systems in Issaquah, so like 30 minutes from Seattle. There's some parks within Seattle that are fun to run around that maybe take 15, 20 minutes to drive to. Um, so I'm generally not doing a bunch of my long runs on roads. I'm trying to get those in trails with some vertical gain. Lucky that I live in the Cascades. Like that is possible for me. I know a lot of people live in flat areas, but I, in the summertime, do find myself trending more toward our like kind of local city parks that have, I can healthily get like 1,500 feet of vert at a park in the city called Discovery Park. And so I try to do a lot of my runs there just so that they feel more similar to where I'm going to race. But I
Yeah.
still, I'll put a speed session on the roads here because it's nice to get that turnover. So I'd say that ebbs and flows throughout the season and what I have access to. Also, sometimes in the winter here, our snow levels get really low and knock out a bunch of options. Honestly, I've been rough in the snow recently. But yeah, so it just depends on what I have access to
Okay.
for, and you can be a very good trail runner without solely training on trails.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you mentioned throwing in a kind of a tempo work on road. And would that be something you would do like even during like peak summer season of like kind of include speed work in your routine on the road and then kind of take your longer efforts out to the
Yeah,
trail?
yeah.
Okay.
I personally also do um, speed and tempo efforts intervals on trails as well, which is very fun and very hard.
Yeah.
But I do like to get the over that I can get on the road. Sometimes it's a good stimulus during the summer when I have eternal trail access. Um, but yeah.
All right. Fair, fair, fair. Um, kind of one of the first questions here from the group, and this is going to be, it's fine. I'll keep my opinions to myself here. Uh, but it just has to do with footwear.
Mhm.
And so I'll paraphrase this question a little bit here, but I'm just going to turn it over to you and let you do all the talking here of just footwear for trail. What are the considerations? How to pick? What was kind of your advice to people on kind of starting that journey?
So, as we all can probably respect, shoes are very personal. look at two shoes that have the same rough specs to them, and you could hate them. You could. So a caveat to this is that whatever feels good, you should run in. But primarily, you for more technical trails. So by technical, I mean something that might be more rocky, have more roots, hard things that you're going to step on. You're going to want a trail shoe. Those shoes tend to have a firmer sole, and most of them have some sort of protective inner layer, going to protect your feet from getting stabbed by rocks and roots. This generally makes the shoe a little bit stiffer and heavier, but leaps and bounds in trail shoe technology even within the last couple of years. So you can get some light running shoes. You also want to look at the lugs on the bottom of your shoe. So the parts that give grip to the ground. Like I said, I'm running in snow a lot recently and mud, and if I'm running in shoes that have a really, really small lug, I'm going to be slipping and sliding. But if I'm running on some local kind of city trails, I can get away honestly with running in my road shoes. And so sometimes it just takes testing. I find that if my feet are really sore after a trail run, my shoes were probably not stable enough for that terrain. And I would say whatever drop you like is fine. If you tend towards having calf issues, you're about to run up a bunch of hills, maybe ultras aren't the best for you. Maybe something with a higher drop. If you tend towards knee issues, you can get away with a lower drop, but like I think it's very personal. So I would think about what terrain you are planning on running on. And I've talked to a lot of people that say they ran kind of some burly trails and road shoes for a while, stayed in one piece. So if you're not really sure what the trails are like that you're going to be running on, you can just go run on them in your road shoes and see how it goes. But yeah, I generally am looking for kind of bigger lugs, like an actual trail shoe that's going to protect your foot a bit more.
Cool. Um, yeah, it's interesting with the trail shoe because there are so many different versions, and kind of there are plenty of versions of a road shoe, but the surface is the same every time, right? You're talking about sidewalk, concrete, track, whatever. Like you're running on relatively flat, happy terrain.
Yeah.
And on a trail shoe perspective, and why I think it's so tricky, to your point, it's like I got a closet full of things with like some
Yep.
miles on this, some miles on this, and it's actually really similar in hiking boots. Like I like to hike, I like to mountaineer, and I have different hiking boots for based on terrain. On the East Coast, Blair and I were talking last week about like how rocky the Northeast is through right here. Like if I take my lightest, most comfortable trail shoes to go run, especially as I go up north in the East, boy, that's going to be a tough day. So I'm going to pull out, they'll sometimes call like a rock plate on the bottom of those shoes. But as Blair alluded to it, as they get stiffer, that break-in period is rough sometimes. Like you got to really spend time in that shoe getting used to it because it feels and functions so much different than a road shoe. And once again, hiking boots, the same thing. And then there's some crazy comfortable trail shoes that feel just like a road shoe. Lugs are probably a little bit shorter, a little bit more neutral shoe. So great piece of advice. And just to double down that Blair shared, which I think I've never really quantified it this way. Which if you come back from a run, your feet feel all beaten up and sore. It's like that shoe was not enough. Like you needed to stiffer shoe or a more protective shoe for that particular trail. And then you run on a lighter trail, you can kind of adjust. But it is certainly something that's just like a lot of stuff takes some experimentation time. I just it is hard. I kind of goofed it last year for my 50 mile. I ended up running the whole 50 in my road shoes. There were some drop bag options, so I had my trail shoes. I had two different trail shoes that drop bags in case my feet got
Yeah.
too beat up. But thankfully, it ended up being like if it had been wet, I'd have been transitioning to the trail shoes. Thankfully, I had a dry day, and so I was all good.
Yeah, exactly. If there's kind of more cruiser terrain, like good flowy single track, that sort of thing, like you can probably get away with road shoes. Um, but anything where there's rocks, yeah, I'd go with something stiffer. And I saw someone in the chat was asking about waterproof shoes, and I feel like I might be a little biased in this because I live in the Pacific Northwest where I'm like, my feet are getting wet. If it's raining, my feet are getting wet. Like, waterproof shoes are really not going to protect me that long. And I do find that they get because they're not breathing. It's like wearing a jacket on your feet. Uh, so I personally don't understand the appeal because you're generally 25 or 35 more dollars for the waterproof one, the Gore-Tex. And if it's raining hard enough, if you're jumping in puddles, it's really not going to keep your feet that dry. If it's a little rainy, if you're prone to blisters, it could be worth a try, but I find that like better back that good socks and good fitting shoes than waterproof ones.
Well, there's a big problem with the waterproof as well, which is once the water gets in, there's nowhere for it to get out.
Yes.
So especially, and I'm sure Blair, you can, if you have any sort of water crossing, but this would count just for rain, snow, etc. Well, once, like I said, once it gets in, I mean, you have a soup bowl at that point where that water is just settling. So as a matter of fact, like the trail shoes that I run in most often have open holes on the bottom of the shoe, so that if you are doing water crossings, there's actually an ability for water to run back out of the shoe. So
Yeah, exactly.
I've had a weatherproof or waterproof shoe before. I've kind of had the similar experience as you, to be quite honest. Maybe in the dead of winter, if it's a second shoe, like okay, but yeah, not for me either.
Yeah, I don't love them. And they're expensive, right? I'm trying
They're expensive.
to.
So something you brought up earlier, but complete important on the road, even more important on the trail because of the logistics. The question here was any safety tips for solo runners, also including those who lack navigational skills and easily get lost in the woods. I want to explore more trails, but tend to do same familiar ones because I get lost easily.
Okay, so we'll tackle the like navigation part first. Um, so I also find myself running the same trails that I know really well because I don't like to have to stop at every like trail intersection to figure out where I'm going. But I have friends who are totally fine doing that, and so I tell them I will try trails. They're in charge of navigation. Uh, but I do oftentimes go to a trail that I'm not super familiar with, and I will either upload a GPX file on my Garmin and let it point me the direction. It's not foolproof, so you should probably have a map on your phone as well. If you are out of cell range, you definitely want to save a map on your phone or even just like screenshot little sections of it. Go with a friend, be able to make good choices on which directions you're going in. But yeah, worst case scenario, I'll grab my phone out. I use the Strava map feature a lot because it has the map. So I can see where I am, see what the most popular trails are in that area and see which direction I want to go. Super useful. Maybe this is only a premium feature. I forget what is on premium and not these days. But I use that a lot. Like I'll pull it out on run, even on trail systems that I'm familiar with. If I'm like, I want to be back in my car at 3 months, what's the way that I do that? I'll even just kind of draw a little map. But navigation is hard. So honestly, like I learned one trail system well, and once I feel good about that, then I'll start discovering another trail system. Definitely on those runs that you are trying a new trail, bring extra gels and make sure you're bringing enough water because you might get a little turned around. I have made mistakes before that kept me on the trail 40 minutes longer than I wanted. But as long as I felt prepared, I'm good. If the trail you don't have service on, definitely tell people where to go.
Do you use a personal locator, like locating device at all?
Not on my normal weekend runs. The trails that I run on primarily have good cell service and they're pretty busy. So I don't normally, but if I am, for example, I love running on the Wonderland Trail. I love running in the North Cascades during summertime, and a lot of these areas don't have cell reception. And so then I will bring my little Garmin InReach that luckily I've not had to use for any like true safety issues. Recent one time I did, but that is a super easy device. It's kind of expensive on the front end, but it's kind of like your watch. It is maybe $300-400, and then like a $10 subscription fee that you can turn off if you're not using it. And you can use it when you're hiking. You can use it when your cell reception goes out at home, whatever. So it is a very useful device. And you can hook it up and you can send the digits to anybody from your cell phone. You don't have to type it into the little reach device. So that is navigation. A lot of races too, they'll ask you to pre-download the GPX file and save it to your phone because a lot of people are hoping that they can just pull it up when they're lost during a race. And if you are even just in a little section that's out of cell reception, you're going to regret it. I've known people to print paper maps because that's who they are. So whatever you need. But then personal safety, I sometimes get casual about this because I say systems over and over again. But honestly,
Blair, not supposed to say that right now.
um, but there are definitely runs where I'm alone out in the woods on trails that I've been on a million times, not felt sketchy, and for some reason I am getting a sketchy vibe, whether or not that is rational or reasonable, who knows. And at those times, I will take headphones out, won't listen to anything. Sometimes, if I'm just getting a little nervous, I'll take one headphone out or turn whatever I'm listening to. Um, I will. I actually recently just got some pepper spray. That's honestly a very small little tube that I got on Amazon for like $11. So it goes really well, like in your pocket or in your running vest. I luckily have not had any super encounters on trails, but I want to be wary of them because I know it happens to people. Um, I also have done a lot of self education about bears and mountain lions, which is another thing that isn't maybe a human factor. So spend a little time researching about animals that are in your area and how to manage them and whether or not you want to, get big or turn and run away or don't want to turn and run and how to handle those situations. It is extremely rare. Um, I am out on trails a lot and I saw 7 bears on trails last year, which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't. 4 were at one time, which was kind of insane, in a spot that should not have bears in it. But as long as you're giving these animals space and you're making noise upon approaching them, you're probably going to be okay. You don't want to surprise animals. So if you're with a friend, you're just chit chatting and they'll hear you coming. Um, Worst case scenario, if you're by yourself and you get freaked out, have your phone, play music. Um, I'm not sure if there's any animal that you should be turning and running away from. So just maybe don't do that. But, head on a swivel. This is another reason why you don't want to be eyes down on your watch, really relying on your phone to get places because your eyes are just going to be off the scenery. But these animals don't want to be around you any more than you want to be around them. So making noise is really good being with a friend. But I honestly, like I said, I go on a lot of solo trail runs in places where there are bears and mountain lions, and it's been okay. It's very, very rare. You want to be ready for it, but it's going to be pretty rare.
On the flip side, I'm always actively hoping to encounter bears in the woods. We have the nice bears on the east. You guys do have the mean bears out there, but it's like the black bears here on the East Coast. I'm always like, hey, bear.
Very like popular trail out here on the Olympic Peninsula where if you go at the right time, like you are bound to see 12 bears. They do not care for you. They're used. It's a very popular like, backpacking spot. Uh, and me and my friend went out there last year to do a long run, and she told me that on a backpack trip the year before, she saw like 12 on like before their turnaround point, and we only saw two.
Well, that didn't live up to expectation.
No, it was fine. I didn't need to be. I didn't want to be on edge the whole
Yeah,
time.
2 is a good amount, I think.
Yeah, see some bears and you're in Washington, I'll give you a trail recommendation.
In terms of like items, if you will, are there any like you mentioned pepper spray? Are there any other safety items that you're like carrying on a regular basis? Cell phone, pepper
Yeah,
spray.
cell phone is huge. I occasionally gone on trail runs without my phone, and clearly time that I like get lost or something. So just take your cell phone, shove it in a pocket. Running great on trails because you don't have easy access to water fountains. You can put your car key in there, you put pepper spray in there, a place that you can reach it, not do any good if it's in the back pocket, somewhere where you can grab it, and phone. I don't really bring anything else with me, or do I know people that do. Just like running on roads, I have friends that would prefer to run in kind of the production headphones as opposed to AirPods. I have AirPods, so
Cool.
have to be careful.
Anything in terms of water filtration?
So if I'm going on a particularly long run, especially in the summer, on a trail that I know has rivers or streams, I will bring uh, a water filtration system called Callaghan, and it's essentially like a bottle that can compress, so it's a soft flask with a twist on top that does filtration. I think they're like 40 or $50. It's great because it condenses down, and it's, I would say, like, I think I have one that's a liter, and I'll fill it up, and it maybe takes me a minute or two to squeeze out all of it. So you're not even stopped for that long. Um, and yeah, I'd say like early summer is about when I start shoving that in my pack as well. Uh, Again, kind of my local trails that I really not bringing anything, but those also really have phenomenal stream access. So yeah, but if I'm North Cascades, if I did a race around Mount St. Helens and I brought my filter to that. Wonderland Trail, I relied on that severely.
Yeah, it's I you pretty much listed everything I think of. This is very fresh for me because I have an athlete that like wants to go up there, and at first she was like, "I'm going to do this 40-mile trail route solo," which the Timberline Trail that I asked you
Mhm.
about, and I was like, "One, no, you're not. That is not something that's going to happen." I was like, it's too far, it's too long, it's too hard, like you're too alone in the woods, etc. But I was like, you need some sort of locator. You need some like at that point, like food and fluid is critical, and like water, access to clean water, super super important. And then like for being that far off, like the personal locator. But and then honestly, if you're going that far, it's like I start to think of like heat blanket.
Mhm.
Um, you already mentioned like doing way more fuel than you think you
Mhm.
need. Just one wrong turn. You mentioned 40 minutes. This was thankfully hiking and not running, but I was in Yosemite and hiked 8 miles in the wrong direction before we used our Garmin InReach Mini to get us back in the other way. So we tacked on 16 miles to what was going to be a 24-mile hike day. To say the least, we were out there many more hours than planned.
Be made all the more difficult if you are not fueled, and if you're dehydrated, it's going to get a lot harder to make good decisions about where you're going. The same race that I did, the Bigfoot 40 around Mount St. Helens, they have a very strict like, to bring a
No.
wind layer. They want you to wear, they want you to bring a pair of pants, like kind of wind layer pants. They want you to bring a space blanket. you to have a whistle, which I would say comfortably like 99% hydration vest should have a whistle tucked some.
Mhm.
Um, and it'll tell you on like tech specs online if you are looking. You want a whistle, they tell you in some of these races a certain amount of calories that you need to have on you.
Mhm.
And I've been in races, I think that one actually tells you that they need you to have 1.5 liters of water capacity. So you don't necessarily have
Yeah.
to have water in it the whole time because you're drinking it. But so I used bottles in the front, and so I needed those, and they wanted me to have another 500 milliliters of capacity that I put in the back of my pack.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's been several races, honestly. Backcountry Rise, which is outside of Mount St. Helens, I did this last year, and I went through 1.5 liters between aid stations, and I honestly wish I had another half a liter of capacity because I was hot and dehydrated. Um, but yeah, so definitely bring more with you than you think, especially when you're new.
Yeah, for sure. That would be because going back to the road, I'd be like, take as little as you humanly possibly can to like go out on the road, even for your long runs. I'm like, figure out a way to pick up water. Try your best not to take it with you. It's heavy. If you're headed on trail, and especially like backcountry in that scenario, it's like one of those you certainly it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it because
Yep.
those miles start feeling long and the last thing you want to do is like in a certain situation they can get scary and
Mhm.
then the fun is over.
I've even been out on trails that I am super comfortable with, and for some reason it is hotter. I'm having a bad day. Maybe I've only brought one soft flask with me, and I very quickly through it. And now I'm stuck out there without more fluid. And I get myself back to my car, and I've embarrassingly gotten myself in at least two very sticky situations where I one time I was just drinking unfiltered water out of a stream, which would not recommend, but if that's going to get me to my car and I'm going to have bad stuff later, fine. And one of them was no water option, so I was just shade patch hopping for a couple of months. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Be smarter than I am.
Tough. Um, one very important one here, because naturally, when we were talking the other day, I was like, I think we'll like power through all these questions, maybe 45 minutes, and then you were like, I don't know, I talk long. I was like, I talk really long. So here we are. We're like
Good
45 minutes
call.
in, and I think one that I think will resonate with a lot of people. And I promise you, I didn't submit the question personally, although it's for me. Is how do I train for trails if I live in a city and trails are not easily accessible? This person actually is from Seattle, but we'll keep it more general. So we'll end it there. It's, how do you train for trail racing, living in like let's say a major metropolitan
So, what you're going to have to do is find anything that has elevation that can be a freeway on ramp that, I mean, safely, right? Um, a parking garage ramp,
area?
anything that has any elevation, find it. And you're going to do repeats on it. Don't have anything like that accessible to you. Unfortunately, treadmill is going to be your best friend because you can ramp those things up pretty high. It's hard, but it's very consistent. The tread hill workout. So that's going to be huge. If, you know, for example, there are plenty of people who live in very flat states. They don't have a ton of options to get on some of these trails, and they've signed up for, a race like Leadville. They've signed up for even just, like a trail half marathon in Colorado or Utah or Washington. And they are going to feel more comfortable if they can get to some trails. And if you have the funds, if you have the time to try to get out on some trails somewhere near you for a weekend training camp, I think at least 4 weeks out from your event if you can make that happen. And so, if you are living in Kansas, for example, like, yeah, Colorado is a hefty drive away from you, but you can put an advantage out there. You do like a Saturday, Sunday effort on trail, and then you come back and that's what you rely on. Um, a lot like, so what we always say to people is that fitness is fitness. So if you really have a ton of access to hills, and yeah, you can only do so many treadmill hill workouts, get fast. Get fast, be able to hold your threshold paces for longer. Uh, Fitness is fitness. It's going to be tough. You're doing your strength training, you are fit, you're going to be as best as you can be, and trying to get on trails every chance you get. And that means, Central Park, you're running up Cat Hill over, that might be your thing.
Oh man, yeah. There. People can't find hills in the city. You give me a call. I'll tell you what. I'll
Yeah.
find some for you.
I hear on and off of Queensboro Bridge is a doozy.
That's a good one. And all you do, you head right over the GW to the Palisades, and
Oh my, that's where I ran
yeah.
in.
Where you
Um,
did what? Where you ran in college?
yeah, when I was
Oh yeah.
at Columbia, I ran across the bridge a lot. It was
Mhm.
lovely. You can get to some spots up there where you can't hear any traffic noises.
It's
It was,
great.
it
That
was
was
lovely.
I lived right at the base of the bridge for 12 years. It was my weekend long run was straight over up the Palisades. And yeah, to your point, I'd finish like my weekly run was like 16 miles like on standard, and
Mhm.
it's usually like 1,800 feet a gain, something like that, or 16, So you're very familiar with the course.
Yeah, yeah,
It's good. I gotta get back up there more.
I know. I love it. Uh, that's a place that I haven't done. Yes.
Well, come visit. Come visit.
Well,
Uh, um, we'll finish off on, or actually, yeah, I was like, I think that pretty well answers. Let me
yeah.
loop back on that. Just one thought before we move along, which is I had to go through this experience and train for a mountain race in New York
Mhm.
City last year, and um, and I also was coaching my athlete David to Leadville, and especially what those training camps, which you mentioned, kind of quickly, those it's seems almost mission critical for so many runners now. And I remember Jason Coop, who is of the Coop cast, was talking about like his coaching service on trail and ultra. They won't even work with people unless they commit to doing some sort of training camp. And they host training camps, but also they were talking about where if you can't get into the training camp, it's like you need to structure your own training camp where if I'll pick on myself only. Like living in New York City, it was very hard to, my race was 50 miles and 10,000 feet a gain. That's not Central Park, unfortunately. Like, well, or probably fortunately, right? Because like not that many people want to run that, all the time, including me. Um, so things that Blair said is, I was treadmill hiking like crazy, and then David, who was going to Leadville, I mean, hours of treadmill hiking with his full pack on that he had to carry, the like multiple liters of water, 15% gain, just like hiking, 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 getting
Mhm.
ready for that. And then the only thing we did a little bit differently too, you kind of alluded to it, like fitness is fitness, is was like don't skimp on the speed work necessarily in order to just do endurance all the time,
Yeah.
because that VO2 high VO2 max, that like those speed intervals, it can help you translate a little bit better to elevation. It can certainly help you like be able to maintain heart rate a little bit better. We start to like hit some really hard inclines. So that was a big takeaway I kind of learned from last year, was like don't skimp on the speed to just like focus on the distance.
Yeah, that's a mistake that I see a lot of people making, especially when they switch to training. They're like, "Oh, I don't have to do speed work." You're just running easy, moderate pace the whole time. Like, I don't have to do speed. But if your VO2 max is higher, that means that your lactic threshold is high, that your easy pace is higher. And no matter how hard or easy your pace is, if you're running a 50 miler, like unless you're dropping out of this race, like you're getting through 50 miles, and time on feet is a huge thing, right? Like I tell my road athletes this as well. Yeah, you can go walk, jog a marathon, and that's totally fine. Your legs are going to feel pretty beat up being out there for 6 or 7 hours as opposed to being out there for 4 hours or three.
Yeah.
And so same thing on trails. Like it is different demons for every person. You're running really fast for a 50K or 50. You're running a lot slower, but you're out there twice as long as the people doing that. And that's tough. Like that is tough on your body. That's tough on your brain. So kind of the get on and off the course, the better systemically.
For sure. So let's finish up with one thing here, which actually it's like I can't believe many people didn't ask about nutrition. It's like the name of the game. That'll be a whole nother topic for another day. But
My favorite
uh,
topic.
this question was, you know, if there are any common etiquette guidelines, I'd be interested to know, especially on single track. So I always stop when there is a chance to shift out of the way if people come up behind. But for example, it's not always possible to do quickly. In those scenarios, I hate to slow down, but also hate to have the pressure to speed up and find a passing spot. So, kind of a two-part question here. One, just as part of it, like, is there etiquette for passing on single track? But I find, especially when venturing into a new sport, and I was the worst at this when I came into trail, and like I was total dummy. I showed up in like my road racing kit for my first trail ultra. Like people were picking on me. Like
Rude.
I'm just kidding. It's true. No one really picks it. It's like all jovial on the trail. But there are some nuances that are a little bit different than road racing. So I'd be curious just to hear your opinion on like the overall etiquette of trail.
So I would say like a general etiquette. Trail folks are nice. You wave at each other. You say morning, evening. If I pass people on trails that don't wave or look at me, I'm, this isn't like we love each other. One reason I love trail running so much is I would say that most trail races that I run, I come away with. I mean, ultras, you're running for a while. You're going to find someone who's the same pace as you and you're going to start chit chatting. One of my best trail friends right now that we run together every week, I met 2 weeks ago at a trail race and it's great, right? So etiquette is that you are nice to each other. You are friendly.
That's a good start because that's immediately different than road racing.
Exactly. If you are in first place, if this is an out and back section and people are cheering for you, like times that I've been front of the pack on an out and back, almost every single one of these people that I'm passing is cheering me on and I'm cheering them on, right? We're all doing something hard. The idea is less of I'm racing other people and I'm racing myself in the course, and anyone who's beating me is just having a better day than I am. I'm not trying to attack and beat them. I'm just trying to run faster than I'm running. And so it's all very positive. So don't come into the trail scene and be a jerk about it. Uh, I would say most trail races, you are like a lot of road races, they don't really want you wearing headphones. You can maybe get away with one, but that's to the point of being able to hear if there's someone behind you. Uh, for the most part, like a single track trail, especially a race, like you are going to be in a conga line for some parts of it, and there are going to be times where you just can't pass, right? You're going to like try not to be running off trail a ton. That's bad for the trail systems. We don't want to cause any erosion or trample all the plants. So try not to be off trail, especially on races. That could be considered cheating. So if there are bigger parts of the trail that widen, say on your left, on your right, I generally don't want the person in front of me to have to think about what is left and what is right. So I say coming up behind you and see what they do. You give them a handful of steps. I always think that I'm breathing really loudly behind people. I'm like, how can you not hear me? But I scare a lot of people on accident. So I try to give them, 10 feet. I say, coming up behind you, and hopefully they move out of the way. If someone is breathing down your neck, yeah, step out of the way. I'd hope that they'd ask. If I'm racing, there's someone behind me and they feel really close, I'd say, let me know when you want to pass. And sometimes they are running behind you because they want you to pace. They don't want to think about it. So they're like, I am fine breathing on your neck. So there's some of the etiquette, I would say, on training around a lot of hikers. The general trail rule is that the person coming downhill is going to move off to the side for the uphill runner. The way I try to remember that is when you're walking or running down a trail, you generally are able to kind of see this broader zone where
Mm.
you're going up because the trail is right in your face. You can't see much. So it's easier for that person uphill to see down and see you out of the way. If it's a double wide trail, don't worry about it. Most trail systems, if they allow mountain bikes are supposed to get out of the way for you. Oftentimes, I find that mountain bikers might, or it might just be harder for them to stop, get off of their bike, where
Yeah.
it might stop me to just pop out to the side. So I'd say that those are the main etiquette things, but just communication, and that's why headphones are probably not a great idea uh, unless you are very spread out on some trails. I've definitely gotten irritated at people during before where they might be running a longer route than I am on this course, and they're walking, taking up the whole trail, and I'm racing and like trying to be done with this event, and they can't hear. So don't be the hear people behind you.
Yeah. I think that's perfect. You mentioned, I think I set up a bad thing of saying like approached things being a little bit off and people were picking on me. But I think one thing is important for people to know who are interested in getting into, especially like trail racing. It is undoubtedly like the most accommodating and welcoming community. Like there is, as Blair was saying, as much people do this for fun to be in the woods. They're not as worried about the time of the race or exactly. I remember running a trail race down the border of Virginia and West Virginia. He called it. He was like, "It's a 50K minus on this race." He's like, "We don't really measure like exactly 50K. It's like
You're like,
sometimes a little short,
oh,
sometimes." He's
yeah,
like, we do another race that's like a 50K plus. It's like an extra mile and a quarter. So it's a very casual thing. Like that particular one started, I'm sure you've done these. Like there wasn't even a starting line. We were just like standing on the edge of a parking lot, and someone
yeah,
yelled "go," and there, off and away, we started running for the
yeah,
next 6 hours.
yeah. It feels a lot more inclusive. I mean, for me, who you know, I'm not so worried about the inclusion, but it's definitely a very inclusive sport. We want everyone to be out there. Like most people on the start line of those races, if you turn, how do you like the they're gonna respond. Whereas I imagine all of the road races that I've done, you're probably not starting at, the New York Marathon and chit chatting with everybody next to you. But it's a super friendly community. I've met a lot of really great friends just training out on these routes. And that's one of the reasons I've gravitated towards it is you work hard, you bust your butt on these races and on these training runs, but it's not all about pace. Like 150K is not the same as another 50K. One half marathon is not the same as another half marathon. Every 100 mile is very different. Every training run is going to be a little different. And like, sometimes, like me, who is a creature of habit, same loops. When you've had a good run and when you've had a bad run. But I feel like sometimes on the roads, you can be like, wow, that felt really good. And then you pull up Strava and you're like, my average pace was lower. Like I thought I did good, and now suddenly you're beating yourself up about it. And like, don't get me wrong, you can get that way in trail running too, but I feel like there's a lot more of like going by effort, going by your performance that day. I a trail half plus that I run a lot out here. 2 years in a row, I got roughly the same time. 1 year I was ninth, 1 year I was second. Just different day for different people, and you can. I feel like it's easier to be easy on your. I also wanted to say if that person who is curious about Seattle trails wants to reach out to me, they can do that on or Instagram or something like that, show them a lot of fun places that you can get relatively easily.
That's pretty good offer. That's pretty. So I'd take it out.
Too. My Strava, I think, is public, which may be safe. But if you wanted some good Seattle, Washington area trail.
Well, Blair, we did it. Thank you so much for being here. This is one I've wanted to do for a while, and it was great. As discussed, we could continue on for many hours on many topics, but we'll loop back another time. In the meantime, thanks to everyone. Thank you again to you, Blair, and we'll talk to you here soon.
Bye.